actually connected to something. It's just going to wither and die. So let's look at what it means real quick to have inspired kindness. Instead of being good for goodness' sake, we're good for Christ's sake. 1 Corinthians 12:27 says that you, plural, you, the church, you are the body of Christ. Now let's look at that implication there. We are Christ, fleshed out to this world. I'm sure we would all agree that Christ set the perfect example of kindness time and time again, with all the healing that went on, with all the demons that were cast out, with all the outcasts of society that he invited in to himself and into his inner circle, with all the outcasts that he ate with, that he preached to, that he cared for. Christ was the ultimate example of kindness. And if we are the body of Christ fleshed out on this earth, then we have to be a kind people. But that's not it. It goes on. This kindness is built upon a foundation. Let's look again at Galatians 5:22. It says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness." Kindness. I think there's a reason to Paul's wording here in Galatians. I think he puts these, what seem like individual fruits, but he says the fruit. I think he puts these virtues, that we call them, in a particular order. I think they build upon each other. You have love through the Spirit, which leads you to a life of joy. And a joyful life brings peace. And inward peace brings patience with others. And patience with others brings kindness. I think there's a foundation upon which kindness is built. And we see this again in these other verses, 1 Corinthians 13:3, Colossians 3:12 through 14, 2 Peter 1:5-7. I like that verse where it says, make every effort to add to this virtue, to this virtue, to this virtue, to this lifestyle, this extra thing. It's a building process. You're not going to get there overnight. It's a process. It's like laying a foundation for kindness. Third point, reflecting God's kindness towards humanity should be a reflection of God's kindness towards us. Let's look at Isaiah 63:7 real quick. I really like this verse. It says it better than I could. Being inspired and all. Isaiah 63 verse 7. It will say, the prophet says, "I will make known the Lord's faithfulness and the Lord's praiseworthy acts because of all the Lord has done for us, even the many good things he has done for the house of Israel, and has done for them based on his compassions and the abundance of his faithful love." I'm going to make known to the rest of humanity the kind of love, the kind of compassion that God has shown for me. How is he going to make that known to the rest of humanity? Is he just going to go out and just shout it from the rooftops? Well, that may be part of it. But is he going to show it to the rest of the world by actually living that kind of life? By living out the love that God has shown him, by his love for others. I also like John 13:14-15. That's the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And when he gets done, he says, "I have given you an example that you should follow." He says, "If I have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." If God in the flesh could come down and serve us and show his kindness towards us, then that's an example that we have to follow. Since we are, going back to the first point, we are the body of Christ. we should be reflecting the kindness that God has shown towards us. And lastly, all people are created in God's image. That's one thing that we need never to forget. Going back to the very beginning when God created man, Genesis 1 says He created them in His image. We are His image bearers, not just God's people, not just the church. Everyone bears God's image. So everyone is worthy to be shown kindness. Matthew 25 has one of the most terrifying teachings from Jesus. It's there on the judgment day, and He says that, in the last day you will be separated like sheep from the goats. And those on the left, He will say, I was sick and in prison and you didn't visit me. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry, you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything to drink. And they'll reply, Lord, when did we see you like this and didn't help you? He says, as long as you did not do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. That's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. You mean heaven and hell could be decided by how we treat others in this world? Sounds like it. But that's because every human being has worth. Every human being is created in God's image. So every human being is worthy of being shown kindness. So we saw a goal with the secular kindness is to just make this world a better place. Let's look at the goal for inspired kindness. The goal I came up with for this inspired kindness is to be Christ in the world and to bring heaven and earth together in a way that shows the love of God to all creation. You can see, we're running short on time, so let's skip to the next slide. Those are just some examples of kindness. If you ever want to look and see, like, hey, what did the kindness look like in the early church? Just read through Acts sometime. Just read through Acts, you'll see it. It's all through there. The early church eating together, sharing together, being one with each other, and sharing that kindness with the rest of the world. It's really amazing. But I want to use the time that we have left to look at this last point. From normal to natural. And I have to confess right here, this is not really original to myself. I was listening to a podcast of sermons by Rob Bell, who's a pretty famous speaker and author in the Christian circles today. He has a podcast from his home church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he was talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And he got to the passage in Matthew chapter 6. Let's look there for a minute. Matthew chapter 6. The first 4 verses. It says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of people to be seen by them. Otherwise you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be applauded by people. I assure you, they have their reward. But when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be seen in secret. And your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you." From normal to natural, Rob Bell, in his sermon, he talks about this verse in a way that I've never really thought of it before. The whole idea of when you give. I mean, Christ followers, at this time being Jews that he's speaking to, were expected to give. It was a Jewish custom. They had certain times, certain dates, certain amounts that they would give to the poor. So it was something that was normal to them. This wasn't something out of the ordinary, like, oh, we're supposed to be giving to the poor? It was something they were already doing. It was something they had been commanded to do. It was a normal, everyday sort of activity. But it wasn't natural, because there were people who were obviously saying, hey, look, I'm giving to the poor. I'm sounding a trumpet. I'm seeking praise and approval from man rather than God. And then there's that whole, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What does that mean? Rob